welcome. We're so glad to have you here. We're honored in your presence. And if you're a first-time visitor, we are doubly honored. We are so thankful that you would take and spend a little time with us this morning as we talk about the Lord and just enjoy this time together. We welcome you to our family, and we thank you. And just hope that this would not be your last time. If it's your first time, we're excited. Next week will be even more so, right? And so we're excited about having you here today and looking forward to what God is going to do in our midst. As I study and prepare each and every week, and sometimes you never really know where the Lord's going, and because I trust that. I don't do a whole lot of way down the road stuff. I kind of really trust in the Lord to give it to me. And this message, as I was preparing it, I really didn't know exactly where it was going to go, but as the morning has continued to unveil itself, now I know. And it's very, very clear. And I just hope that what is going to be said today will be a blessing to you. In 1969, happened to be the year that I came around, but it was also the year that a movie came out called Change of Habit. It starred Elvis Presley, and he's just sitting on the couch, and he's looking at all the different people in this place. He says, "Stop, look, and listen, baby, that's my philosophy." So you've all heard that, right? You're probably in the remix or whatever, but the old rubbernecking song. But we hear those words, and we think, what is that? How could that possibly apply to Jesus? But we look at our text for today from Hebrews, and we'll see how this message comes. The beginning of that song, those few little words, it was lively, it was catchy, it was fun. The phrase, "stop, look, and listen," has been used in multitudes of ways over the course of time, of course, in songs and in warnings and ideas, and even at the railroad. Stop, look, and listen. We see that. But the simple principle that we find in these three words, stop, look, and listen, goes to one word: attention. What are we looking at? What has our attention? What is keeping our eyes on something? The water that we find, or the writer, I'm sorry, I can't read my own writing here. The writer we find here in Hebrews chapter 12 is painting a very clear picture of where we are to place our attention. How many of us can agree this morning that it's easy to lose our focus? It's very easy, right? I mean, we've got so many things grabbing for our attention. Every buzz and every ding and ring and ringtone and all these things, everything is catching, everything is vying for our attention all the time. Here we see this passage. It begins with the word "therefore." That's a very common phrase throughout Scripture. But when we look at that word, and I've talked about this before, when we look at this word, it means "for this reason." Now, that's a word that we use all the time, but we never really think that it has a meaning. Okay, so the writer here is saying, therefore, for this reason, here is the message. Here is what I want you to hear. And then he goes on, he says, since we have such a large cloud of witnesses surrounding us. Now think about this a minute. Living out our witness, walking as we've been called to walk, is not always easy. And then when we stop to think about it, everybody sees it. Everybody sees it. It's visible. It's there. You can't hide it, right? Because we're in a great cloud of witnesses pretty much every day. Whether it's at work, whether it's at school, whether it's at Walmart, or at the gym, wherever you are, there's always people around. What is our witness? He said, if you consider that as we're living out our witness, we're surrounded by them. He said, let us lay aside every hindrance, every snare, everything that gets in the way that so easily ensnares us. Stop. What stops us? What gets in the way? He said, be mindful of what gets in the way. What holds us back? What hinders our run? We have to think about that, right? As we're going along in the way, what is getting in the way? What keeps me from going further? What keeps me from accomplishing this? What keeps me from being who God has called me to be? What keeps me from expressing that? Stop. Give that some thought. We consider the idea of crossing the railroad track, right? We generally, if we're mindful of what the safety of that is. We stop to see if it's safe to cross. We stop before stepping off the sidewalk at Walmart because it might not be safe on the way to your car. And if you go to the one across the street, that's very valuable advice. That's free. You can take that today because you should be careful because they come racing through that pretty quick. But seriously, we stop. But do we stop when we consider not only our walk, our physical and literal walk, but what our witness looks like? What does that look like? What does that appear to be? But sometimes there is stuff preventing it from running with endurance. Because the writer here says, run your race with endurance that is set before you. Run it with endurance. Here we read, he says, put the things away that get in the way of that. Put the things away that hinders your endurance, this race that is set before us. What is that race? Life. That's the race that's before us, is the race of life. He said, what is getting in the way? What is getting in the way to keep you from living life at its fullest and carrying forth this witness, this testimony that you've been given, this story you've been given before others? What's in the way? What's keeping it in the way? We understand the word endurance. All of us, if we've ever been in any type of athletics or anything that requires us to have a little bit longer ability to go, that requires repetition. You have to do it more than one time. It's not just, okay, I'm gonna again, I use this analogy all the time. There's a big difference in going by the gym and in the gym, right? Big difference, right? And so if we go in there one time and say, okay, I've got it all I need, well, that's not true. If you go buy gas for your car one time, so that's all I need, well, eventually you'll be walking. We have to build things with repetition, right? But what gets in the way? How do we find this strength? How do we find this drive? Well, we turn to verse 2. And the very first few words tells us the answer. Keep your eyes on Jesus. He says, keeping your eyes on Jesus, the source, the author, the perfecter, the finisher of our faith. Keeping our eyes on Jesus. Why does this change things? What does this matter? Because it tells us He is the source. He is the author. He is the perfecter. He is the finisher of our faith. In other words, He is the literal everything of what we believe and why we should be mindful of what our run looks like. This is our example, the writer is telling us. Look here, this is the one that you keep your eyes on. This is the extreme example. This is the one that started it. This is the one that finished it. This is the one that can show you everything that you need. Doesn't that make sense? You know, when we have goals in this life, oftentimes we look for someone to follow. We look for someone to emulate, a role model or an example of somebody that really, really did it well. You know, whether it's business or whether it's fitness or whether it's music or whatever. And we look to that. But as we're looking at our spiritual walk, as we're looking at the life of our faith and how we walk that out, why wouldn't we want to go to the one that started it? Why wouldn't we want to go to the author? Why wouldn't we want to go to the finisher, the one that set all the examples in between? How credible is what we see when we look at Jesus? What do we find? What do we find? We see He is the source. He is the author of our faith. In other words, He set all the examples. So when we look at the principle of stop, look, and listen, when we stop, if we stop physically, we stop in place or we shut down in some type of manner. In other words, I'm mobile. I'm immobile now. I'm not moving anymore. So I'm firmly in my place. What does that cause us to be able to do? Look. It causes us to be mindful of what is around us. We're observant of our surroundings as to what is near, what is safe, what is dangerous, what is interesting. So if I stop long enough to look, then things begin to start looking different, right? We begin to observe. We begin to be mindful of other things. And in the process of that, what do? We start to listen. We begin to listen. We get so busy today. We got so many different things going on that we don't do that. You know, we don't stop long enough to look or to listen. You know, we have that, and we see that causing all kinds of calamities in life, you know, whether it's car wrecks or whether it's this or that. But sometimes it causes a lot of problems within our own self. It could be our health. You haven't stopped long enough to take care of yourself. Well, I'm too busy to do that. You know, I worked a car wreck years and years ago when I was on the road. And there was a lady, a rural mail carrier. And if there's any of you in here, forgive me, please. I don't mean to say anything about your profession. But the rural mail carrier, the lady was driving to carry mail, and she caused a terrible wreck because she just pulled right out in front of somebody. And so we get there and we're dealing with the wreck. And I asked the lady, I said, I mean, what were you thinking? She said, I got to have the mail in time. I ain't got time to look at the road. I'm like, okay. So sometimes we have to stop, we have to look, and we have to listen. So when we listen, what are we giving our attention to? What are we giving our attention to, or who are we giving our attention to? What do we have an interest in? If we apply this principle, if we apply this statement to verse 2, keeping our eyes on Jesus, we quickly see how stop, look, and listen applies, right? Because he said, keep your eyes on Jesus. That requires me to slow down long enough to see what he's doing. That requires me to slow down long enough or to stop long enough to hear what it is he has to say. And so as directed, when Jesus said, follow me, singular directive, if we do that, then we stop going down the road that we were going. And we go down the road he is carrying us. It changes everything. It changes our physical direction, our mental, our spiritual, our emotional, everything. It places us on an entirely different course that allows us to see that things can be different. Things can be better. You know, how many people do we know around us today that seemingly, at least in their mind, have decided that they've lost all hope? There's no good answers. Everything's terrible. And they kind of live in a state of negativity. But that's not true. Yes, there are bad things in this world, and there are bad situations, and there are bad people. But we don't have to follow that. He said, follow me. And as we go through the midst of this, as we run with endurance, this race that is set before us, we need one that gives us the example. And what we see in its example is that not only does he know where he's going, he is the author, he is the founder, he is the source, he's everything of our faith. In other words, he is what we believe and why. And that is so important to understand. And John 3:16, of course, is very, very clear that he came to give us the gift of salvation and that all who would believe should not perish but have everlasting life. Okay, so he is the giver of life. He is the one that sustains life. Hey, we have that. John chapter 10, he said, I come to give you life and it more abundantly. This speaks of now and later. It's not just a one-time thing. It is from now on when you come to know me. Yes, this life changes, but it prepares you for the next one. And it solidifies and lets you know that it's going to be okay. So what do we find in the midst of this? It says here to run with endurance, to go with endurance. How do we get that? When we look upon Jesus, when we keep our eyes on Jesus, we find strength. We find comfort. We find endurance. We find answers. That's the key. We find answers. How does this help us? How does this help us? Then we're able to run the race. We're able to do it. We're able to make the steps. We're able to make the strides. And where we couldn't get today, we can get a little bit further tomorrow, and a little bit further the next day, and a little bit more. You know, I could only do this many push-ups today. I can do that many more tomorrow. That's how we work there. We're building that strength spiritually, physically, emotionally, keeping our eyes on Jesus. Of course, the key word here is keeping. That's the key word, meaning consistently. Why does that matter? If we think about modern times, if we think about the way that we operate today, it's kind of like our Wi-Fi connection, if you will, all right? It's like our power source. If we are no longer connected, if that signal is broken or that power is no longer surging through that cord, the function being performed does what? It stops. It doesn't work anymore, you know? And if, you know, you're 14 like my children, they think the world has stopped because, I can't get on the Wi-Fi. But it's, I promise the world keeps going. It's okay. You know, we still use, you know, I still use a pad and write my notes down. So it's okay. But we seriously, we think about that, and the world operates on that. And when those things stop, we kind of shut down. Wasn't there? Now, I'm not on that provider or whatever, but I guess there was like a big shutdown this week for a lot of people, AT&T or whatever. So, you know, we don't get into all them conspiracies or whatever. But still, there was a lot of stuff happening, right? And so we see the world stops But here's the thing, when we stop, what are we looking and listening at? What are we paying attention to? And this is what the scripture is leading us to. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Keeping is the key word. Peter, he was able to walk on water as long as he did what? Keep his eyes on Jesus. That was the key thing. He could not do the supernatural. None of us can do the supernatural without that. But looking upon Jesus, keeping his eyes on Jesus, he was able to do that which is impossible. He was able to do that which is unbelievable. The minute those eyes came off, he went down. When we fail, and there's going to be times in life that we're going to, that's just reality. When we stumble, if we'll stop and we look and we listen, oftentimes what we find at the root of that is we took our eyes off Jesus. Okay? If we're following him and then we decide, well, I'm going to go in this direction, then we'll be just like Peter. Lord, help me. That's where we find ourselves, drowning, going back down under. It's just the same thing as believers. As believers, friends, understanding this, staying in tune with our source, staying in tune with the author of our faith is most important as we navigate this race that we call life. Because the strength of that walk is measured by the great cloud of witnesses surrounding us. So what are you saying, Pastor? I mean, are we to be concerned about being judged? No. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. That's not what that means at all. Here's what it means. Our concern should be if others are seeing Jesus as we run. That's where the difference is. It's not about what they're going to say and who they're going to see. Okay? Because we're all gonna have a moment. We're all going to have one of those moments that we don't think that we're doing things right, or maybe we don't say the right thing, or maybe we get upset because life happens, right? You know, you can have somebody pull out in front of you in traffic, or you can have something go wrong, or get a phone call you don't want. We're all going to have those moments. You know, it's going to happen. That's not to justify any bad behavior or anything else, but it's going to happen. But that is what he's saying here is when you're running this race, when you run it with endurance, when you've got the strength that you need, be mindful that people that are watching you run, they see why you're doing it. They see who you're doing it for. They see who's giving you the strength. You know, just like when one is watching somebody grow physically and maybe getting stronger and doing the different things that they're doing, you're putting the work in. You know, you're losing the weight, or you're doing this, or you're doing that, and you can see those physical things. Well, in our spiritual life, it should be the same, right? It should be you're getting stronger. Man, how do you even deal with that? How did you get through that tragedy? How did you deal with that grief? All those things. Run with endurance. See, friends, we wrestle and we fight the enemy all the time. Okay? Because he's relentless. He tries to never give up. You know, our two young people that came forward and professed their faith today, I pray over everyone, as you know, that we do that and have those moments, because I know that public profession is a beautiful thing, but I also know that it really, really makes the devil mad. Because he doesn't want that. So he's going to try to come against us in every possible way to cause us to say, well, should I have done that? Or did I make a mistake? Or did I really mean it? It's all those moments of doubt. But that goes back to the garden, right? Did God really say that you're going to die? It's the same old playbook. I mean, he's just like a politician. He just keeps telling the same old lie every year, hoping somebody will believe it, right? I mean, and that's just kind of that's how it works. And so we see and understand we wrestle against this. It comes. But as we read, the writer here says, lay aside every hindrance, everything that so easily ensnares, every sin that so easily ensnares. In other words, stop, look, and listen. What gets in my way? Ask yourself that question today. What gets in my way? What hinders my run? What causes me to stumble? Because we all have a different answer to those questions. What bothers you don't bother me. And vice versa. That's how that works, right? We don't all have the same issues, whatever they may be. You know? And that's not to point out any one issue over another. We all have whatever. But we have to stop, look, and listen. Let me be mindful. What is hindering my run? What is keeping me from not being able to get to that next place? What is keeping me where I am? What would create a challenge from someone else? What would create a challenge from someone else if they said, I don't see Jesus in your run? Now that would sound offensive, right? But it should also be a moment of, whoa, wait a minute. I need to take some mirror time here. I need to see because if you don't see him, there's something wrong. I need to be mindful of that. You know, we need to be mindful of our witness if we stop. In other words, literally take the time to consider. If we will look, if we will listen for the answer, we keep finding the answer is keep your eyes on Jesus. Keep your eye, that's always at the core of everything. The most important part of our run, the most important part of our run is often forgotten. And I'll tell you why. If you sign up to run a 5K, 10K, a marathon, whatever you're going to do, but you have done absolutely nothing to prepare, no training, no building up, nothing to strengthen your endurance, that run will not go well. You won't make it very far. You know, you'll be gasping for air before very long, you know, looking for the water fountain. And it just doesn't work. And we know that if we've ever tried. Oh, I can do that and go out there, you know, and you've made it around the first 30 feet and you're already sucking wind. I mean, you weren't ready, okay? And it takes time to get there. But the willingness to prepare, the availability is there, the opportunity is there, but will we take it on? So here's the question. If we know that from our physicality, we know that from things that we've tried to do that require endurance, why would we consider life any different? I'm just going to get out there and do it. No, you got to listen. You got to learn from others. You got to lead by example. You got to have some examples. You got to have so many different things that we look upon. And the writer here says, if you really want to know how to run this life, run this race with endurance, keep your eyes on Jesus. He's our example. He's the one that started it. He's the one that finished it. And he did everything in between. He dealt with rejection. He dealt with hurt and grief and crying and shame. And he dealt with it all. He knows how to help you. He knows how to get us there. How is he our example? We read here that he is the author of our faith, the starter, the source. Matthew chapter 3, at the baptism of Jesus, we hear the voice of the Father. He says, "This is my Son in whom I am well pleased." That's the confirmation. There's no question as to who this is now. That's the confirmation. In John chapter 2 and verse 5, at the beginning of the miracle of turning the water into wine, Mary said to all, just do whatever he says. That's still great advice today. That's keeping your eyes on Jesus, because she knew that he spoke with authority. He taught with authority. He walked in authority because he is authority. And when we begin to understand that, it starts changing things. At the beginning of Mark, we see that his call to Peter and Andrew and James, he says, "Follow me, and I will make you," in other words, I will teach you to be fishers of men. Follow, watch, learn, grow, so that you can help others. In other words, stop, look, and listen. It all starts to come together, right? It all starts to make sense. So how is he our example? He did it all. If we read this text, it says he is the source. He is the author. He is the perfecter. He is the finisher of our faith. He started it. John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word. He started it. He is it. And he finished it. As on the cross he cried out, "It is finished." We read here, for the joy, that's a key word, for the joy that was set before him, the joy that was laid before him. What was that joy? Our salvation, our eternity with him, if we will accept him. It says that for that, he endured the cross. Endured, that's endurance, right? He took forth, he prepared along the way because he knew it was going to be brutal. We see the prayers in the garden. It was not going to be easy, but he prepared himself. He asked for the Father for strength, that the Father's will be done. And it says that he endured the cross. He went forward. He did not resist the pain. How many times do we not do something because it's going to hurt? We put it off. You know, and it could be anything. It could be a test. It could be something physical. It could be trying to get ourselves in some kind of condition. It could be that's going to hurt, or that's going to be too hard, or I'm going to be too sore, which I am today, by the way. But that's a whole other story. But we'll see. We understand. He endured. He endured it all. He endured the struggle. He endured the grief. He endured the horrifying situation. It was totally, from our point of sight of understanding justice, was completely unjust in every way. Witnesses were lying, all this different. But he endured all of that because of us. He did it because he loves us. It says he kept going. He kept going because he says, you're worth it. Think about that for a minute. Take that personal today. God says, you're worth it. A lot of times life doesn't make us feel that way. A lot of times society causes us to doubt our value. Oh, I'm no good. You're a loser. You're this, you're that. Society beats us up sometimes, but God says, you were worth it. And because of that, I kept going. It says here, he endured. Keep your eyes on him. And when we do that, we build endurance for our race. We read here that he endured the cross. He took everything that it offered, and he defeated it. Imagine that. Think about the brutality there, all the different things. He took it all, and he defeated it. It says that he despised the shame. In other words, he hated that it had to go this far. It was awful that it had to go this far, but this is how far mankind had fallen. It took this type of penalty to pay it. You know, it couldn't be anything any less. It had to go all the way. And now it says that he is set down at the right hand of the Father. He is set down at the throne of God. How was he our example? He finished the race. He finished the race. And that is so important. How does this impact our life, friends? How does this impact our life today? If we will stop, if we will look, if we will listen, it'll impact our life in a very, very powerful way. See, our concern about others begins to grow deeper. You know, it's just like that video with that lady saying, that's what I said, God was really, even just watching that and listening to this morning and all the different things that we've done, our concern for others begins to grow. You know, here that lady talking about, you know, this young single mom is in need, and that burdened her heart. She said, there's got to be more. I got to be doing more. My circle is not big enough because I'm not seeing anybody that I need to impact. When we begin to run this race with endurance, when we begin to keep our eyes on Jesus, our concern about others grows deeper. I find that in my life, and I say that not in any way bragging on me. I'm finding that as a deep change. Even people that I don't know. You hear about people on TV that you've never met before, but they've lost their life. You know, that burdens me. Were they ready? I don't say that in a judgmental way, but did they know him? Were they ready for that moment? Or we see people in dire situations and we pray for them, even if we don't know them. We become concerned about others. We get concerned about our witness. We do. We get concerned because there's so great a cloud of witnesses around us. We don't want them to not see Jesus. That becomes a real situation to us. We begin to learn to lay aside all the junk that gets in the way because we realize we don't need it. You know, some of you would understand this as many of you have moved over the course of time. I myself have moved many times in my life. And do you ever find yourself maybe after your, we'll just say multiple time moves, that you ask yourself, why are we dragging that old box of junk around? We hadn't used that stuff in 40 years. What do we need it for now? Let's get rid of that, right? Oh, but it was from grandma. But sometimes we have to understand in life, there's just some stuff we just don't need. It's a hindrance. It holds us back. You know, it keeps us from running. It's like trying to run with a parachute on your back, right? And it open. You know, all that wind is kind of keeping you in place, right? And so we think about that. What do we do? What do we do? We got to get rid of the junk that gets in the way. We recognize what our good is, and we clearly recognize what needs to go. We have to be able to do that. When we realize the vital importance of keeping our eyes on Jesus, when we realize he is the source, when we realize he is the perfecter, he is our greatest cheerleader, friends. He is at the finish line. He's saying, come on, just a little bit more, just one more lap, just one more river to cross. Don't quit. Don't stop running. Don't give up. You can do this. It's just one more river to cross. It's just one more mountain to climb. It's just one more valley, one more battle with the devil. Keep your eyes on me, and you'll make it. And then I'll give you rest. We can hold on to that, friends. This race is tough. It's tough. We all know that. And the longer you're in it, the more endurance we need. Amen? That's just real. That's just real. So what do we do? What do we do? What do we do when we find this truth? What do we find when we keep our eyes on Jesus? Friends, I'll tell you what we find. We find freedom. We find freedom. We find love, and we find joy, and we find peace and forgiveness and kindness and strength that we never knew existed, that we didn't even think that we could possibly have. We find the ability to show him to others. When we keep our eyes on Jesus, we find everything that we need, because he is the author and the finisher of our faith. He is everything that we need. He is the author and finisher of all that we believe. So here's the question. Are you running with him today? And if so, are you running with endurance? Are you running with endurance, or are you over by the water cooler not knowing if you're going to be able to make it? And you got the ace bandage on your ankle and the copper zone gimmick on your knee and all the other things that we've got trying to hang on. If something is in the way today, if anything is in the way, stop, look, and listen. Find the issue. Let him get you back in the race, because the finish line is just up ahead. Amen? All right, let's pray and then